What makes a good combat system?
So, you're looking to play, huh?
And of course, he would open up with DMC, one of the greatest combat systems like I can think of.
Alright, I guess I got some time to kill.
From Golden Axe and Double Dragon to Bayonetta and God of War, there's no shortage of games about beating the crap out of people in hand-to-hand combat or close-quarters sword fighting. And so it's no surprise that one
Bro, For Honor had a really good combat system. It was kind of like rock, paper, scissory, but it was still good.
of my most requested video topics is melee combat systems. How do you design a brawler that makes you think carefully about every move you make? A game that's so deep you'll still be learning the ropes 100 hours in, and one that just feels incredibly satisfying when you score a perfectly timed parry. What are the essential elements of a good combat system? Well, the truth is that, like most things in game design, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. The needs of a fast-paced fighter like Devil May Cry are very different to the slow and deliberate combat of Dark Souls, which are different again to the scrappy street fights of the Yakuza series. So there will be some commonalities that are shared universally, but other design decisions that will change depending on the feel and flow of the game in question. We'll figure that out as we go along, but for now though, let's jump into the first major topic, attacking. Every protagonist in a combat game is defined by the ways they can attack. That might mean swinging a giant sword.
Oh my god, I forgot about Monster Hunter. Monster Hunter, at least, like, my introduction was Monster Hunter World. Oh my god, it was so good. And even the combat system was, like, relatively simple. What was it? It was, like, light attack, then heavy attack. And then you could, like, sprint, jump, and, like, climb. And depending on whatever your character state was, you could like incorporate like different moves. Like you could like wall run up or whatever. And I think, what was it? Like the long sword, you wall run up and you had, I think it was like full spirit meter or whatever. Or maybe I'm thinking of, not, okay, there was World, and then there was, what was the other one? Sunbreak or whatever. You run up a wall and then you just like come down on a monster or something. Or, yeah. But then that was longsword. Like the other one I made was like double, what was it? Double blade or whatever, or twin blade. Oh my god, that was so freaking sick. At least for Sunbreak.
In Monster Hunter, bouncing enemies into the air in Devil May Cry, chucking a hefty great axe in God of War, or cracking a whip in Castlevania. Action game heroes typically have a small handful of base attacks.
Bro, what is this Transformers one? Oh my god.
And each one will have its unique advantages. It might be a particularly strong attack, or a very fast-moving strike. It could have a wide area of effect, or a big range. It might push enemies away, or knock them into the air, or bring them in closer. The attack might let you fight from a distance, or perhaps it stuns the enemy, or breaks their block. Of course, each of these attacks will be balanced with disadvantages. A heavy, damage-dealing attack will often be quite slow to perform. A move that can hit lots of nearby foes is great for crowd control, but doesn't actually do much damage. Maybe the move leaves you vulnerable after performing it, or requires a certain resource, or is on a cooldown timer to stop you spamming it. Now, when we talk about fast and slow attacks, we're really talking about frames of animation.
Yeah.
You see,
I would be willing to bet all of this can be applied to fighting games as well, or whatever. So yeah, it's kind of more or less the same, but just like in all these like action adventure brawlers, it's like you're doing it in like a 3D space, whereas in most fighters it's like a 2D space.
When you hit the attack button in a brawler, you don't immediately strike your enemy, you just start the animation that will eventually land a blow on your prey. Every animation can be split into 3 phases. The anticipation, which is the wind-up to the attack. The contact, which is when the attack actually lands and does damage.
The active
and the
frames.
recovery, which is when the character goes back to a neutral state. It's mostly the anticipation phase that will dictate the speed of the attack. Look at the light and heavy strikes in Transformers Devastation. The light attack makes contact in just 14 frames, while the heavy attack takes a whopping 36.
Dang. Bro, I'm thinking in my Marvel vs. Capcom brain, like a 14 frame light attack, that is forever. Like, because when I played Marvel vs. Capcom, I would always like have Wolverine as like a starter, and his light attack was like, it was like a 4-frame jab. You could just sit there and spam that thing to like hit confirm. And then once you do that, you just go into like the magical series. Like essentially you just one tap somebody and you like touch a death them. Oh my God. I remember that. It was so fun.
That's really worth considering because you're completely vulnerable during those anticipation frames.
So there's like a little dichotomy going on. So like light attacks, you can kind of afford to be like up close to the enemy because you know the attack has like a very fast startup and the active frames are going to come out pretty quick. With heavy attacks, you kind of have to like back away from the enemy because it takes longer to like start up and get those active frames out. So it turns into this like boxing match, more or less, you know. That's why in like a lot of professional like fighting games or whatever, you see like people jockeying for what they call neutral or whatever. And while they're doing that, like going forward and backward, they're trying to anticipate when they can throw out a good move to like just barely tap the enemy with like the active frames. They don't want to have to, like if you do a heavy attack right in someone's face, these guys are like so reactive, they'll just knock you out of it or whatever. So yeah.
Frames, meaning the enemy could move away, start blocking, or even worse, attack you with a quick strike. And if you want a really ridiculous example, try doing a heavy strike with the Black Knight Greatsword in Dark Souls, which has almost 2 seconds of anticipation before the move connects. Plenty of time for enemies to poke you in the tummy. Now what makes Dark Souls really interesting?
Bro, if you think that's long, play Monster Hunter and play with that big ass, what was it called? Not the long sword, the great sword. That thing is giga long, all right? You have to like charge that shit up to do any sort of significant damage or whatever. Oh my God.
Is that during this time, plus another second or two of recovery afterwards, you can't do anything. You can't dodge, do an attack, or block. That's because the Souls games don't have animation cancelling, which is when you can interrupt one move with something else.
Yeah, you cancel the animation of one move into a different move. That's literally all it is. Street Fighter is known for this. A lot of Capcom games or fighters are known for this. You know, like light, medium, heavy, and then like let's say you do a Hadouken or whatever, like just quarter circle forward.
In stark comparison, check out Bayonetta, where you can change your mind at any moment. You can be halfway through an attack and then cancel that animation by instantly transitioning into a dodge. This somewhat subtle change makes Dark Souls very deliberate and forces you to consider every move carefully and makes Bayonetta very free-flowing and non-committal. But does it make the latter game easier? Not necessarily. When you're given the opportunity to cancel any animation at any time, enemies can be more aggressive and won't wait for you to finish up your current move.
Right. So like I'll say this. So whenever you have like more free-flowy stuff like Bayonetta and like animation canceling, the devs probably, in order to like counteract that, because you know the player's just gonna sit there and spam moves on the target or whatever, they usually give them like super armor. And in general, what that means is like the enemies won't be put into hit stun, like they won't be stunned whenever you like come into contact with them. Whereas in Dark Souls, like I would be willing to guess like most moves from Dark Souls, whenever you come into contact with something, at least for, I don't know, maybe with like a heavy attack or something, you're gonna see the enemy like recoil and be put into like stun animation where they can't do anything for X amount of like, you know, maybe it's a half a second or whatever. So that's usually the I don't know, the cutoff or whatever. Well, not the cutoff, but like if you're gonna have more free flowy stuff, you got to give enemies super armor. And if you're not gonna have any free flowy animation canceling, then you could probably afford to, you know, reward the player with more enemies being hit stunned.
Look at how you're completely invulnerable during these finishing strikes in Rise, Son of Rome, but you have to be really on your toes and ready to dodge while punishing foes in Bayonetta, as enemies will come up and fight you midway through a spanking. Now, when we talk about range, it really
Oh,
depends
boy.
on how sticky the game is, which is how easily you snap to nearby enemies. So in a game like Arkham Asylum, where Batman will magnetically snap to enemies in the next postcode whenever you hit the punch button, attack range is pretty irrelevant.
Bro, as cheesy as the combat system is in Batman, bro, it felt so good with all your gadgets and being able to like make this little combo thing like shoot up. Oh my god, you really felt like Batman, you know? Like, because essentially you can just extend the combo just by like hitting a counter, and then let's say you do the counter animation, you're invincible as Batman, and then some other enemy like it just comes in swinging. You can just literally just jump over them, and the combo doesn't degrade or whatever. And then you go in for like a single attack, or you go in for like a bat gadget or whatever, and then jump again. The combo still not went down. And then you just keep doing that, and you just hop around. It was so fun.
Whereas in Bloodborne, which has almost no snapping, it's critical that you're in the right spot before you strike, and that you think about the size, range, and shape of every attack. As the game goes on, you'll come to internalize things like the exact pixel distance your whip will reach when you jump. A certain amount of stickiness is going to crop up in fast-paced games, but I think it's generally a good idea to ask the player to think about positioning, because it adds an extra dimension, or two, to consider. And if you want, you can get incredibly specific, like with Marth in Super Smash Bros., who does much more damage with the very tip of his sword compared to the rest of the blade.
Good point, good
So
point.
you can think of these different attacks as your tactical options, and what designers should aim for is to have every move fill some niche and with minimal overlap. So when you see an enemy in an action game, you shouldn't just randomly hit one of the attack buttons, but carefully consider which will be the right move for this exact situation.
Bro, the Transformers game, I had no idea this existed. He just goes into car form and just headbutts him or whatever. Oh my god, it just rams him. It's so funny to me.
I guess it's like the difference between weapons in a shooter. A shotgun, sniper rifle, and assault rifle all deal damage, but with very unique properties that make them tactically distinct. The more moves the player has, the more options they will be granted, but the distinction between these different options will start to become very subtle in a way that novice players may never see. Veteran players, however, will certainly appreciate the minute differences. Still, there's no need to put actions on every button on the controller. After all, one of the most sophisticated action franchises around, Devil May Cry, has loads of unique moves with just one main attack button. So we can look to my video on versatile verbs and perhaps grant the player a charged attack if they hold the button down, or use buttons in tandem with one another. DMC's basic attack becomes an uppercut if you hold the analog stick back, or a darting stinger if you hold the analog stick forward. There are also plenty of opportunities for contextual moves, like Yakuza's environmental finishing attacks, or the backstab in Dark Souls. And of course, there are combos. These moves, which see you pushing buttons in a predetermined sequence, sometimes with a small delay between buttons, are an import from fighting games and offer a reward for memory and timing. They generally just grant extra damage, but sometimes they provide even more tactical options for the player.
And plus, they just make you feel like a badass, alright? Who doesn't? You know, like, depending on your audience, you know, it's like 18 to 25. But who doesn't want to be a badass and just go in, swords spinning? And, you know, you're slicing up the enemies left and right, you know? You're Raiden from Metal Gear Rising, Revengeance or whatever. And you're just... Bro, when that mechanic came out and you could, like, control that little cut line and just flick that thing back and forth, oh my god, the first time I did that, I was like, this is fucking cool.
Combos can be a bit overwhelming, mind you. I can barely remember my pin number, let alone all these moves in Bayonetta. So more casual and accessible games like Assassin's Creed and Rise Son of Rome instead grant you extra damage if you hit the attack button as soon as the previous one lands. This time the games are testing and rewarding your timing and ability to read the animations rather than your memory.
Bop.
So attacking is one thing, but a great combat system also offers interesting ways to defend yourself from damage. This typically comes in the form of a block and a dodge, and much like attacks, these defensive options should be distinct from one another to make you think about the right way to deal with the next incoming strike. let's look at Dark Souls.
Ooh.
In that game, a block is easy to perform and typically negates all damage, but it's a big stamina drain, and some enemies will even break your block. The dodge, on the other hand, lets you completely avoid an attack because your character is made invincible during the roll, but it requires careful timing to pull off, also drains some stamina, leaves you vulnerable during the recovery, and changes your physical location. Decisions. There's one other defensive move though, and it's one you'll see in a lot of good combat systems. I'm of course talking about the parry, or counter. This is the pinnacle of the brawler skill bros, alright? Motherfuckers, if they can parry or can counter, they will try to parry and counter, because for some reason, and I'll reference Street Fighter 2, or was it 3, Third Strike or whatever? Street Fighter Third Strike. In that game, like, you can move your character around like whatever, but like if you hold you hold the thumbstick away from your enemy, you're obviously gonna block. But if you tilt the thumbstick in the direction towards your enemy, like as the attack is about to hit you, you go into like parry frames, and essentially the moment you go to parry, you can just start a combo like instantly. So then your enemy's going to be stuck in recovery frames, so you can just, it's like a free combo if you can get the parry off. So that's just like parries in games are just like flexes or whatever, but it's like kind of skillful. So it's just an interesting thing. Typically when you hit the block or dodge button just as the enemy's attack lands,
right in the
giving
dick.
you some kind of bonus, often a lethal blow. These are super fun to pull off and a real test of timing that makes you feel amazing when they work, but they can become overpowered, drowning out the rest of the combat system and turning the whole thing into a waiting game and a simple test of reflexes.
Yes, but like on this instance, there's like the developers put this many enemies in the room to begin with, all right? So, hey, if you're just sitting there just countering everything, it's like, what are you gonna do? I mean, Batman is like the one game where you can like essentially just cheese it all or whatever. You got like all the gadgets and whatnot, and then like jumping. I don't know.
I'm not even exaggerating. If you've ever played the early Assassin's Creed games,
Oh,
you'll
yeah.
know the joy of standing around with your sword up, countering one enemy
Yeah.
after another.
Yeah, that is
So
true.
how can we avoid this? Well, one way is to make parries more risky. You see, designers need to pick the exact moment during the enemy's attack animation that a parry is viable. Games like Batman are way too generous, making it effortless to counter every attack, whereas something like Neo makes it a lot tougher. You can also increase the punishment for missing a parry, like how if you mistime a dodge in Breath of the Wild, you'll be trapped in a recovery animation and vulnerable to being attacked. Another option is to limit the number of parries you can perform, like in Bloodborne, where you have to fire quicksilver bullets to stun enemies and leave them open for attack. That ammo limitation makes you think carefully about which moves you'll try to counter. Other games simply don't let the parry be a one-hit kill. In Bayonetta, dodging at the last second lets you enter a slow-mo witch time, while in God of War, a well-timed counter puts your enemy into a stun. Both help you, but you'll need to use the full combat system to actually defeat those enemies. So those are some ways to stop a game becoming too reliant on defense, but on the flip side, some games let you get away with being so aggressive that you don't really need to block, dodge, or parry at all.
True.
This is often down to the way that enemies get stunned when you attack them. Hit an enemy during its anticipation frames and it will cancel your foe's attack and leave it unable to move or dodge while you tee up your next attack. This is generally called stun locking an enemy and lets you just wail on foes without needing to worry about them fighting back.
Yeah.
One way
So like, if you're like a brand new person and you never played a fighting game before, and you start playing fighting games, I always heard my buddy Darren talk about, oh my god, you just keep hitting me or whatever, and I'm stuck in stun lock. You keep stun locking me with all the attacks. You keep comboing me or whatever, and it's like, yeah, that's the game, dude. If you don't want to get hit, don't get hit. All right, move around, block, push block, or whatever, So that can be like very confusing, like stun locking, because like in general, like that kind of makes sense to, if you're hitting an enemy, that enemy should be stun locked, as opposed to, some other game or whatever, where like if you hit an enemy, they could have like some sort of armor or whatever on, and meanwhile it doesn't stun lock them, but you still do the damage. So, yeah.
One way to fix this is to give enemies a stat that stops them from being stunned until you do enough damage. Dark Souls calls this poise, while most fighting games call it super armor.
Yeah.
Another way is to have some form of stamina, like in Nioh, to stop you from infinitely spamming attacks. Or you could have multiple enemies attacking you at once, so you can't focus all of your time on one enemy and must block and dodge those incoming foes. Or you could just make certain attacks impossible to interrupt, or let enemies break out of stun lock.
Ooh, the unblockables. Yep, those are always fun.
I mean, it's not very hard to implement, designers just have to remember to do it. Basically, we don't want the player to aggressively chew through enemies without ever thinking about defense. But we also don't want players to hide behind their shield, waiting to pull off parries. An exciting and dynamic back and forth between offense and defense should be encouraged at all times. And really, the main way to encourage this sort of behavior is through interesting enemy design. Enemies should test you on both your offensive and defensive skills, with a wide range of foes that move in different ways, attack at different speeds, and can block, dodge, and perhaps even parry your moves.
True.
Plus, the player should be prioritizing different enemies, like focusing on attacking those who can attack from a great distance, or quickly killing off healers who can respawn fallen enemies.
Yep, always kill the healer first, then the range, and then the melee. All right, that's how it always was. That's how it always is. That's how it will always be.
Picking your targets is yet another thing to think about. These enemies should be given clear designs with distinct colors and easily readable silhouettes, so players can learn which enemies are capable of which attacks and then pick them out from a crowd with ease. Plus, those all-important anticipation frames should be hugely exaggerated.
Bro, is he going like Ultra Instinct mode right now? He's just like hands down, just dodging this dude.
On enemies, because they should be telegraphing upcoming attacks. Other games like Bayonetta also use sound and visual effects like glints on the enemy's weapon to give you a heads up that an enemy is about to strike. Handy when the game is just buckets of visual stimuli being pumped into your eyeballs. What designers want to avoid, I think, is enemies that can only be killed with very specific moves. This essentially crushes all those tasty options we just came up with down to just one dominant strategy.
Ooh,
However, enemies that are resistant to certain attacks, like big brutes who can't be parried in God of War, are good because they force you to use other moves and strategies. Because interesting enemies are a major way to encourage you to use the full moveset on offer.
I think this can also be true. This is like a completely off topic, but like this is also true for Doom Eternal enemies. With all the guns and all the mods you have for your guns or whatever, you use almost every mod for the gun for each different type of enemy, more or less. There's like, what was it, like the snake lady that like is constantly like moving around the field, and depending on where you are, she will just pop up and destroy you. I literally forgot how to like, I think you just like freeze grenade her, and then she's like easy to kill off of that. You had like the big cacodemons that you just like put a grenade, you shoot the grenade out of your shotgun or whatever. What else? There's just so many different types of enemies that move the Doomslayer around, and you have to utilize your entire arsenal to dispatch all the different kinds of enemies. So I think Doom Eternal did it fantastic, at least from like an FPS perspective, for it's coming up with like a lot of the utilizing all these concepts or whatever,
and not just rely on the same few attacks or a couple memorable combos for the entire game. But there are more ways to do that, like how Fury gives you some health back if you pull off a difficult parry, or how Transformers lets you do a high damage vehicle attack at the end of successful combos.
Or you just drift
of course, the most
them.
obvious way to achieve this is through a scoring system, as seen in pretty much every Clover and Platinum game. These give you points for pulling off combos, mixing up your attack patterns, and fighting enemies in quick succession, but remove points for taking damage. A scoring system allows novice players to get through the game with simple button mashing, but bad grades, but provides an extra challenge for those who have learned all the intricacies of the combat system. One other way to make sure you're using every tool in your arsenal is to have enemies adapt to your playstyle. It's not something we've seen in a lot of action games, but it cropped up in last year's Middle-earth Shadow of War. In one memorable battle, an enemy got wise to me jumping over its head and so started to deflect that move, forcing me to find another option, namely shooting him in the arse. So you've made lots of distinct attacks, and you've crafted some great defensive moves, and you've used interesting enemy designs to keep a good balance between offense and defense, but your game still sucks. Why?
What?
Well, it probably just doesn't feel very good. Hits feel weak, and counters don't have that crunch that makes you feel like you just pulled off the most difficult move in all of gaming. So to properly provide this feeling, action game developers spend huge amounts of time on art, animation, and sound to really sell the impact of every attack you make.
Oh yeah.
So remember those 3 animation phases I talked about earlier? Well, they're also used to make attacks feel more impactful. Check out this ridiculously satisfying punch finisher from Resident Evil 6.
Yep.
If we break it down, there's a huge wind-up where Chris leans back, then a very quick snap to the enemy's face, a brief pause upon impact, and then a lengthy recovery where Chris's arm hangs in the air afterwards. This is the secret to a good, crunchy attack. Huge anticipation. In God of War 3, we even get some cheeky slow-mo at the start of heavy attacks to increase the animation frames. Then a very quick strike towards the enemy.
Oof.
In Rise, this is so fast that huge chunks of the animation are cut out. From one frame to the next, your sword can travel great distances. Then a brief moment to pause upon impact. In Transformers, the 2 characters stay in the exact same pose for 3 frames upon impact. And finally, a hefty recovery to show that your hero really put their all into that attack. And all of this can be accentuated with visual effects like colored lines of motion, which are super prominent in God of
War. I'm a sucker for the color lines, alright? I'm not gonna lie, I like all this like impact bullshit, colorful, shiny
and also
stuff.
help explain the unique shape of each attack. Or blowing the screen upon impact, big sparks and other fireworks, the enemy flashing red, or playing a hurt animation, or being bounced off to the other side of the room, and of course, some good, crunchy sound effects. Here's a great video about making a powerful punch sound from scratch. So, what makes a good combat system? Well, ultimately, an action game is all about making decisions. About which enemy to hit, where to stand, which attack to use, and when to use it. Plus, how to react to incoming attacks. In some games, this can be quite thoughtful and considered. In others, you're making these decisions at 1,000 miles an hour. These games might be overcome by just mashing buttons, but good enemy design and addictive scoring systems push you to be more precise in your movements. But every design decision must be made carefully to contribute to the overall feel of the game. Everything from the camera, which swoops out wide in free-flowing fighters but hangs in close for one-on-one brawlers, to the stickiness of your character, to the use of animation cancelling, to the generosity of when you can parry moves, should all fit each game's unique feel and flow.
Bro, a lot. Like, one thing that I can say is like, I'm gonna gripe on this again. So it's like, the reason is off topic because you mentioned the camera thing. It's like, the reason action scenes in movies suck nowadays is literally because of all the camera work, and nobody wants to put in time and effort to the choreography anymore. All right, gone are the days of like the Jackie Chan, wide angle, get back, let the audience see what's going on between, the 2 fighters, and let them see a big roundhouse coming around, and heck, cut back to it again or whatever. He did that a couple times, The reason why like fighting games, or not just fighting games, but like action brawlers or whatever, feel good is because you have that like wide angle. Whereas like action scenes in movies, it's just like punch, cut. We see the hands coming at us. Cut. Okay, we're gonna do the punch again, and then the punch is we're gonna look at the face. All right, and now the body's gonna come in contact to the wall, and then he's gonna hit the ground, and now we're gonna go back to that guy. He's gonna come up with his leg. All right, and then we're gonna go back to the dude's reaction. It's like, bro, can you just stop cutting so much?
And on top of all that, the game should just feel amazing to play, with all sorts of subtle animation tricks to make every attack hit as hard as a truck. Nail all that, throw in some innovative new mechanics, and you might just have a combat system worthy of the greats.
Maybe.
Thanks so much for watching. In the future, we might be able to look at some specific games to see how their melee systems are designed to fit a specific style of combat. For now though, let me know your favourite combat systems in the comments below.
Nice.
GMTK is supported by viewers just like you who kick a few dollars a month my way over on Patreon.
Ooh, baby. What another banger from Game Maker Toolkit. 5 years late. Still relevant though. Oh man. But yeah, I mean, like some of the funnest games I've played have been like these brawler type games, and they're so good too. I mean, I don't know. I just never have time anymore or whatever, but you know, maybe I'll pick up a couple in the future or go back and play some of the old ones. Who knows? But overall, I think this was another great video. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I'll see you guys on the next one. All right, later.